Today I'd like to talk about the banks, but one in particular, which is UBS. As everyone knows, Credit Suisse was forced on UBS last year. They merged the two largest banks in Switzerland together, okay? And it was because CS was definitely bankrupt. Now you have to understand something. I know the bank wasn't bankrupt, okay? But the people who do this every day, all these regulators, they understand the balance sheet, and that's what we're about to talk about today. So the former Swiss finance minister, who was basically in charge of these banks, has come out and says he's warned about the size of the enlarged. This is CS and UBS put together and its effect upon Switzerland. So the gentleman goes on to say, hey, look at the size of their balance sheet, $1.7 trillion. And then let's look at the Swiss economy. The Swiss economy is about 800 billion, so just a little less than half. Now listen, you can go in and you look at Google and everything, and there's some people who say that they've estimated their economy is as big as $925 billion. So 800 to 900, somewhere in there, is the Swiss economy. So what does that mean to us? Well, if you look at Credit Suisse and UBS and you put them together, both these banks have been problematic banks for the last 20 years. I don't think anyone would deny that. And why they're problematic is the bad assets on their books, which are reflected inside their balance sheet, which is $1.7 trillion. So what you look at and you say, now I know that Credit Suisse, they said they had about 300 billion in bad paper on their thing, and UBS was probably about the same, let's say 250 billion. So that's $550 billion, okay? Now you look at UBS's price here, and by the way, if I went back and took this out like forever, right, to see how long it is, UBS is basically at an all-time high, and they're worth, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, $110 billion. So how do we read that? Well, you sit there and you say, this is what we call tangible common equity. The price of the stock times the number of shares outstanding equal market cap. But this is our tangible common equity, the only thing that you can write losses off against. The only thing, okay? And by the way, it's not $110 billion. If UBS lost, let's say, $20 or $30 billion, the bank would go down in an instant, okay? Because no one's going to lend them money to maintain their margin. So the bank essentially is 17 times leverage on the size of the bank. 1.7 trillion, $110 billion, okay? So let's say UBS gets in trouble and they go bankrupt. What happens then? Well, one, the Swiss don't have another bank to give UBS to, okay? So then they would what? How would this happen? So let's go back to the great financial crisis, which no one wants to talk about. But UBS and Credit Suisse went belly up during that banking crisis, just like all our banks were belly up, all right? So how did the Swiss bail out those two banks during the great financial crisis? Well, I'll tell you how. The Fed gave them the money. We lent them the money. Because think about what you had to do. You're Switzerland. What do you print? You print Swiss francs, okay? By printing Swiss francs, if you had to bail out these two banks, which are twice as large as your economy, the Swiss inflation rate would have been like 10,000%. And they couldn't have done it, all right? So what we work with, and by the way, we had to do this. Don't sit here and say, oh, America's saving the world. We were saving ourselves. There's a thing called counterparty exposure. So if you take all the GSIBs, the 29 GSIBs in the world, they all own each other back and forth, upside down, everywhere. Counterparty exposure. If one goes, all go. That's the rule. One goes, all go. There's nothing that could stop that from happening. Nothing. That's how intertwined the banking system is. So If this UBS goes belly up, something happened, which it always does, okay? What does Switzerland do? How do you do this? I don't know. It's a dilemma. I mean, basically, Switzerland, the country, is too small for their bank, all right? And the reason that happened was because they had the secrecy, money went around the world into CS and UBS and all the other stuff. And so thereby the banks got bigger and bigger and bigger, much bigger than the economy. And well, here we are, all right? But in those days when we were just taking in cash and hiding it, it had nothing to do with today's world where we're doing derivatives and everything else in the world, which interlocks all the banks together. So if UBS goes belly up, there's going to have to be some kind of agreement. And it may be with the EU because maybe we're not going to play this game anymore. I have no idea. I'm saying it's a dilemma. And they're pointing out the dilemma. And so you would think that you would be worried about this if you're a banker, if you're the head of UBS. But look at what's being said. The Swiss government has been asking for more capital to be kept aside, more capital to protect, that 110 billion versus the 1.7 trillion. They've asked for 15 to 25 billion in additional capital. That's it. And they are met with resistance from the bank. The bank says, we have plenty of capital to pay off any losses, potential losses, which is, well, it's just not true. They don't. So during the great financial crisis, it was in the United States' best interest to go in and help the Swiss save their two banks. And I just want to point out on the side, after America, Switzerland is the most banked country in the world. And that means that they have plenty of other banks that also have balance sheets. So the 800 billion, it may be on top of 3 or 4 trillion, okay? So this is a real thing. So what I would say is that as we're entering into this new world, as we're transitioning into the new world, we call the old world, at least I do, okay, the great central bank financial era, right? And in that era, it's undeniable that the global banks that ruled this global world were the United States banks. It's not even close. Not even close. You have no clue. No clue. This is not even close. So, as we start regionalizing or breaking down the global system, one of the things that are going to happen is, one, I think our global banks are not going to be the earnings juggernaut they've been for the last 40, 50 years. In fact, I would argue it's going to be the opposite, okay? And secondly, it now comes into question whether it's in America's best interest to bail out the Swiss banks to save our banks. Maybe we just save our bank. Or does the EU then go in, and where do they get the money to do that? And by the way, the EU has to deal with Deutsche Bank, which is probably worse than all the banks added up. So this issue is not going away. The question is what are we going to do? What are the Swiss going to do? What are the Europeans are going to do if there is an issue, which there will be? What do you think? Like and follow, put in the comments, whatever you think. And thank you very much.